Greetings from Mesa United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We are located at the corner of Taylor Ranch and Montana Road, and we invite you to join us for worship every Sunday. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m., and our contemporary worship is at 11 a.m. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. To honor all copyright restrictions, we have removed some audio and video footage from this message. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Reading 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 8. I thank God, whom I serve, as my forefathers did, and with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers, recalling your tears. I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I have been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. So do not be ashamed to testify about our Lord, or ashamed of me as his prisoner, but join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Reverend Dr. Randall Partin, who is the provost for the New Mexico Annual Conference, United Methodist Church, which means lots of things. Basically, he's the assistant to the bishop, as well as running the conference office staff. And Randall and I have been working on a date for him to come and be our guest preacher, and looked like this, what might be a good one, and he said, what do you want me to preach on? I said, well, kind of whatever you want to do, but we'll just be finishing up a series on Pixar. And he said, can I preach on Up? I said, certainly, that would be fantastic. So let me introduce Randall, and thank you for being here, and his message on the movie Up.
So I am thrilled to be here with you. Oops, I just turned it off. Thrilled to be here with you. Let's try that.
There you go.
Good. Great, thank you. I appreciate the introduction. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm excited to share with you some of my thoughts about the movie Up, but let's start with prayer. Oh God, lend beauty, truth, strength to my words. May they fall like sweetly cadenced chords, or burn like beacon fires from out the dark, or fly like arrows, swift and sure to their mark. Amen. So the movie Up. I happen to think that the movie Up is an American classic. How many of you, just by show of hands, how many of you have seen the movie Up? That's going to be helpful because I'm not going to show a lot of clips from the movie. And I'm hoping that for those of you who haven't seen the movie, after I share with you this morning, you're going to want to go see the movie and see if you see the things and hear the things that I am seeing and hearing in this movie from Pixar. So what I'm doing, and I don't know if John's been doing this in terms of the Pixar series, but what I've done in preparation for today is to watch the movie, to think theologically about this movie. What insights, what glimpses of the kingdom do we see in this movie? And I'll jump off of those and not get into too deep into those, and then jump onto another one and onto another one. And like I said, hopefully this will be an opportunity for you to think a little more deeply about this movie. And if you've not seen it, maybe it'll encourage you to watch it for yourself. But let's start with a short clip that is towards the beginning of the movie. Adventure is out there. So this movie is all about adventure. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, and for those of you who'd like a recap, Carl and Ellie that we saw in that little clip at the beginning were children at the beginning of the movie, and they end up falling in love. And they end up getting married, and they share their life together. And along the way, they dream of an adventure, just like Ellie did in that little clip, of one day going to Paradise Falls. And they even had a change jar that they kept in their house where they would keep all their spare change to save up for that journey. And along the way, life happened, as it is wont to do. And they keep having to break into the change jar to pay for things around the house, or to pay for a new tire for the car. And the opportunity slips away for this adventure to go to Paradise Falls until late in life, he buys a couple plane tickets for Carl and Ellie to go to South America. And he finds out that Ellie is sick. She's dying. And they never get to go to Paradise Falls. And so Carl is now alone. He's a widower. He lives in this home that he and Ellie built together. And one day, this massive building project starts springing up all around his house. And this forces his hand in a sort of a roundabout way, and he hatches this plan to launch himself, house and all, into the sky by attaching thousands of helium-filled balloons to his house, which, because it's Disney, it works. Only Carl had a stowaway. And he had a stowaway on this journey by the name of Russell, a young wilderness explorer. And that's where the adventure really begins. So, let me start with a quote. So, Chesterton once said that an adventure is only an inconvenience, rightly considered. An adventure is only an inconvenience, rightly considered. And an inconvenience is an adventure wrongly considered. So I'm curious, how many of you have had an adventure, an inconvenience rightly considered, an inconvenience like hiking the Appalachian Trail or going whitewater rafting, or that you intentionally sought to inconvenience yourself for the sake of adventure? Any show of hands? Okay, how many of you have had an adventure that was really an inconvenience? It started out more as an inconvenience, or you thought of it as an inconvenience, and maybe if you thought about it as an adventure, it might have been considered differently. Great, thank you. So, hopefully, there is this sense that we've all had an adventure in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it was an intentional adventure, an inconvenience that we chose. Or maybe it was an inconvenience that happened to us that became an adventure, became one of those stories that we tell about the time that we got stuck between Socorro and Truth or Consequences when we ran out of gas. That would be an adventure. But one of the components, I think, of a real adventure, that I think we see in this movie is facing our fears. Carl faced his fears walking across that piece of wood going to his balloon. And Carl and Russell certainly had to face their fears in the movie when they're up in the air and there's this massive storm and they crash land in South America. They have to face their fears. They have to risk being afraid. They have to risk their security in this adventure. And facing our fears is why I asked for us to read the passage from 2 Timothy, where Paul writes to his young friend, Timothy. And he says, God did not give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. And I think it's telling in this passage, particularly when we think about the story of Carl and Russell in the movie, that Paul, the Apostle Paul, writing to his young friend Timothy, uses the plural in this particular passage, in this particular verse. Paul did not say, God did not give you, Timothy, a spirit of cowardice. He said, speaking to Timothy, God did not give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice. It's plural. That spirit of love and power and self-discipline is a spirit that applies to all of us and all of us collectively and all of us together. And one of the critical lessons or insights from the movie Up is that the spirit of adventure is ultimately, inherently, critically relational. It's about our relationships with one another. Adventure is not something that is personal or private or individual, but something that is shared with another person. Carl and Ellie shared an adventure called their life. Carl and Russell shared an adventure, and they even added to that adventure when they widened their circle and they shared it with Doug and Kevin. Even the logo for the Wilderness Explorer Scout Troop that Russell is a part of has this enormous clue front and center. W-E. We. That's a clue. Adventure is something we do together. And I think it's telling, I think it's critical even, that Charles Muntz, that adventurer extraordinaire who originally inspired Carl and Ellie's adventures, I think it's intentional that even though he started out a hero in their eyes, he became a villain. He became warped. He became ruthlessly eccentric, in part because he strikes out on his adventure alone. He becomes a loner. And that's what turns him into the bad guy in this movie. And it's something, it's that turn that we catch a glimpse of in Carl's own story when he's alone. And he's a grumpy old man. And he assaults one of the workers who accidentally knocks over his mailbox. And we see that when you're alone, that spirit of adventure becomes warped a little bit. And thankfully, a young wilderness explorer by the name of Russell shows up on Carl's doorstep, and they have an adventure together. So what does that mean for a life in faith? Well, it means lots of things. For one thing, I don't know that I need to remind you that in our own creation stories, in Genesis chapter 2, going all the way back to the dawn of time, to the story of how we all got here, we read in Genesis chapter 2 where God said it's not good for the human to be alone. And what did God do? God set out to create, to fashion a partner, a helper, a friend, a co-adventurer for the human that he had created. We are hardwired for relationship, for community, for relating to and being in community with one another. In the New Testament, Jesus calls his followers, this is the passage that we read earlier, he calls his followers fellow adventurers in this life and ministry, and then he sends them out. And did you catch how he sent them out? 2 by 2, in pairs. He didn't send them out alone. He didn't send them out one by one. He sent them out together on an adventure with another person, together in community. And in the story of Pentecost, in the movement of the Holy Spirit that brought about and ushered in this new age of communication, of relating to all kinds of people who were hearing the gospel in their own language, in their own tongue for the very first time. It is God's design for us to be connected, for us to be connecting, to share our lives, to share the gospel with others, to share this adventure with other people. We dare not live our lives in a privatized, personalized faith, cut off from others, shut off from the world like Charles Muntz. Because that's not God's intent. It's not God's design for us. And to paraphrase John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, he said, you can no more be a solitary Christian than you can be a solitary adulterer. You can no more be a solitary Christian than you can be a solitary adulterer. It takes being in relationship with other people for you to be a true Christian, for you to be an authentic Christian. Our life in faith requires social connections. An adventure of a life in faith requires social interaction. It requires relationships. Adventure requires other people. But I also think in this movie, there's this clear urging and nudging towards adventure in terms of risk and accepting risk and being vulnerable. Taking a chance to walk out onto that plank. And to echo back our passage from 2 Timothy, the spirit of adventure is not a spirit of timidity. It's not a spirit of caution. It's not a spirit of fearfulness. Adventure is out there. The question is whether or not we're going to pursue it, whether we're going to seek it out, whether we're going to explore it, whether we're going to live it together. And I love the scene where Russell, who lacks only one badge to become a full-fledged senior wilderness explorer, starts complaining when he is actually in the wilderness because the wilderness is not like it sounded in the book. Too many of our Christians live their life in faith like Russell. Earning our badges, ticking off the boxes, living our life and adventure inside of a book. And we're not in the real world. We're not taking the information that we are learning in this book and applying it to the wilderness that is our lives. We are not living the adventure that God designs for us. And until Carl met Ellie, until he met Ellie in that clip that we showed earlier, Carl is content to merely imagine adventure, to pretend adventure. He's living in an adventure in his mind. And then when Ellie passes away, all he seems to want to do is to close himself off, to lock himself up, to stay at home with his memories, not having any more adventures. And folks, that's a metaphor for the church. We lock ourselves up in our sacred spaces with our memories of what used to be, what might have been. We are content to live in the memories of adventures that we had with Jesus long, long ago, or even better yet, memories of adventures that other people had with Jesus long, long ago. And like Carl, even when push comes to shove and there's this massive storm raging outside, we lash together everything that we can. We lock down all of our stuff and all of our precious, precious memories, and we hang on for dear life rather than face the storm and step out into the adventure. For Carl, this house that he lives in becomes the personification of everything of worth, everything of value, everything that is safe and sacred in his world, and he does everything that he can to protect it. Sort of the way some of our church folk behave about their church buildings. Forgetting that the church, properly understood, isn't the building, but the people, the relationships, the connections, the lives, the ministries, the adventures, the stories that are facilitated and made possible by the building. And there's this great scene towards the end of the movie where Carl is forced to choose between his house and the adventure. And instinctively he chooses the house. He allows Charles Muntz to get away with Kevin, this rare South American bird. And he chooses the house instead of the adventure. And Russell, our young wilderness explorer, grabs a fistful of balloons and a leaf blower and blows himself off to go chase after Kevin. And Carl realizes that he needs to choose adventure too. So what he does in this great scene towards the end of the movie is he goes through his house and he starts chucking everything out of the house because there's still balloons holding the house up, but it's too weighed down by all the stuff in his house. And so he starts chucking things out the door, and he chucks out the change jar, and he chucks out the chairs that he and his wife sat in for so long, and he chucks out pictures and everything else so that the house would be light enough to be lifted back up into the sky and he could go off on an adventure again. And the music that's playing during that scene is memories can weigh you down. I wonder how many of our churches are weighed down by the memories of what used to be. I wonder how many adventures Christians miss out on because they're too obsessed with maintaining the museums of their faith rather than engage in authentic mission and ministry, the adventure of life-changing work in the here and now. One of my favorite passages of Scripture is John 10:10, where Jesus says, "I've come that they might have life, have it abundantly." They may have life and have it abundantly. How many of us miss out on that abundant life because we're afraid of what we might lose? In their book, The Faith of Leap, which I highly recommend it if you haven't read it, by Michael Frost and Alan Hirsch. In this book about adventure in the church, what it means to recover a spirit of adventure in our life and faith, this is what they say. Hirsch and Frost say, "The loss of spiritual adventure produces a somewhat distorted sense of what it means to be in the way of Jesus." A loss of spiritual adventure produces a distorted sense of what it means to be in the way of Jesus. We become bored Christians, acquiescing to the lame dictates of a mediocre life, sensing that we're missing out on something important, but not willing to pay the price to do anything about it. Mediocre Christians sensing that we're missing out on something important, but unwilling to do anything about it. And this is what they say. This is an inauthentic place for any follower of Jesus to be. Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life and life abundantly." life without adventure, friends, is not life abundant. Adventure is out there. We were made for life, and that life abundant. We were made for life together in community and relationships, for sharing our lives and our adventures with one another, even with, especially with, hear me church, people who are different from us. People who are as different from us as Carl is different from Russell, and as Doug and Kevin are different from Carl and Russell. God calls us into relationship with all kinds of people, even when we don't know what to do with them. One last thought, because I think this is important. For me, the critical turning point in the movie is when Carl has chosen the house and Kevin has gone off. Carl goes back in the house with all of his memories. And he opens up Ellie's book, as she showed him in that clip, her book of adventures. And up to this point in the movie, every time Carl gets to the page of stuff I'm going to do, he just closes the book because he knows that he and Ellie never had the adventure that he promised her. As he's sitting there, he starts to close the book, and the page slips, and he sees beyond the stuff I'm going to do marker. There's page after page after page after page, pictures of their life together. For all the things that Carl and Ellie did in their life together. Ellie saw in their life together that every moment of their life was an adventure. She saw, like the poet said, everything charged with the grandeur of God. That's how you live a life of adventure, not necessarily to seek out risky or dangerous or enormously adventuresome things, not to rightly consider an inconvenience, but to see all of life as filled with the fullness of God's power and love and grace and mercy, and to embrace all of it as one great adventure. I'm going to finish with a passage from Hebrews chapter 12. This is from Eugene Peterson's The Message, because I love the turn of phrase that Peterson offers here. He says, translating this passage from Hebrews chapter 12, he says, so here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. Your everyday, ordinary life. Your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for God. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit in without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, and you'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you, and quickly respond to it. Unlike those around you, always dragging you down to their level of immaturity, God brings out the best of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. So take your everyday, ordinary lives, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around lives, and place them before God as an offering. And that, my friends, is the spirit of adventure. That's the spirit of adventure. That's the spirit that Carl and Russell experience at the end of the movie when they're eating ice cream and counting red cars and blue cars. Because it's an adventure. Their life is an adventure. Their ordinary life is an adventure. Friends, adventure is out there. God is calling us into that life of adventure. Will you go?